Hello, travelers. Professor GreyTail here. I know that you have already learned much about our magical world, where good and evil intertwine their wands in an eternal dance. But I am certain I can still surprise you. Night settled softly over the Scottish Highlands, draping the land in silver hush, and far in the distance, faint lights shimmered against the dark. Hogwarts Castle, rising once more from the shadows of war. Though its towers stood proud, many stones still bore the scars of battle. Shattered walls had been mended, scorched floors restored, and ancient wards, those unseen sentinels that had guarded the castle for centuries, were being woven anew by careful, vigilant hands. Yet, on this quiet night, something stirred beneath the castle's foundations. Not a sound loud enough to wake a sleeping student, not a tremor strong enough to rattle a window pane, just a subtle shiver. A ripple of old magic turning in its sleep, confused, restless, and hungry. Few noticed it. None understood it. But the first whisper of trouble had arrived. Up above, the lanterns of the great hall flickered as Headmistress McGonagall finished her evening rounds. Her steps were brisk, precise, yet touched by a weariness that came from rebuilding not just a school, but the trust and hope of its young witches and wizards. She paused at a window overlooking the Black Lake. The water rippled strangely tonight, though no wind stirred the trees. She frowned, her sharp gaze narrowing, but after a long moment, the surface stilled. Merely the squid turning in its sleep, she murmured, though her voice lacked conviction. Elsewhere in the castle, the dormitories hummed quietly with the soft rhythm of slumber, except for one small corner of Gryffindor Tower, where 2 third-year students whispered beneath flickering firelight. Elias Wood, a boy with windswept brown hair and a habit of leaning too close to danger, sat cross-legged beside his best friend, Marigold Prewett. Marigold, thoughtful and sharp-eyed, kept her red curls tied back as she studied a parchment filled with peculiar notes. "Look at this," Elias whispered, tapping a line he had marked. "A surge of magical interference. Professor Flitwick said the wards are behaving unpredictably." Marigold frowned. "Because they're still being rebuilt. Everyone knows that." "But this wasn't just a harmless flicker," Elias insisted. "My quill lifted right off the desk and started scribbling upside down. It spelled something." Marigold raised a brow. "Elias, your quills have a mind of their own on the best of days." "This one wrote a word," he said quietly. "Breach." Marigold's teasing expression faded. She looked at him carefully, then at the parchment, where he had recorded every detail with unusual precision. Why would it write that? And why now? Elias shook his head, but before either could continue, the tower shuddered, not violently but deeply, like an old giant shifting in its sleep. The fire dimmed, the shadows stretched, longer than they should have, darker than they ought to be. Marigold gasped. "Did you feel that?" He nodded. "Something's wrong with the castle." In the morning, they took their concerns straight to Professor Longbottom. He listened patiently, as he always did, his warm expression softening the more he heard. Neville had become a favorite among the students, for he understood courage in quiet places and listened even when others dismissed a worry as childish nonsense. When they finished, he tapped his fingers thoughtfully on his desk. "You've both got good instincts," he said. "Magic does behave strangely during reconstruction, but a quill writing the word breach on its own is not something we ignore." So something is happening? Elias asked. Neville hesitated before answering. There have been anomalies. Strange shifts in the protective enchantments. Nothing dangerous yet, but enough to keep us watchful. Marigold leaned forward. Professor, do you think Hogwarts is in danger? Neville gave a small, reassuring smile, though his eyes held a concern he could not hide. Danger? Not at the moment. But the castle is alive with magic older than any of us. When it stirs, we must pay attention. Before they could ask more, the bell chimed for first period. Neville dismissed them gently, though his gaze lingered on the parchment Elias had brought. When the students left, he stood, crossed to his bookshelf, and pulled out a weathered volume on ancient wardcraft, its spine cracked, its pages yellowed. Founders preserve us, he murmured. Let this not be what I fear. Deep below, in the cold stone chambers forgotten by most who lived above, the air shifted again. Dust rose from the floor. A faint pulse of darkened light, like a heartbeat, glowed and vanished. The breach was widening, and Hogwarts was beginning to wake to an old, unraveling secret. Morning dawned pale and mist-touched, the kind of morning when the castle's many staircases seemed to creak with their own complaints, shifting back and forth as though reluctant to wake. Students hurried along the corridors, carrying books and half-finished toast, yet an unspoken tension rippled through the air. Nothing obvious, no dark clouds, no threat in sight, but rather a subtle hush, a prickle along the skin, as though Hogwarts itself were holding its breath. Elias felt it the moment he stepped into the corridor outside Gryffindor Tower. The torches sputtered softly, dimming without cause, then flaring back to life. A tremor of cold brushed his shoulder like a passing shadow. Marigold, appearing at his side with her usual neat stack of parchment, paused mid-stride. "Did you feel that too?" she murmured. He nodded. "It's getting stronger." But before they could dwell on it, a crowd of students surged behind them, pushing everyone onward toward class. Elias and Marigold exchanged a glance. There would be no quiet conversation now, and hurried toward their first lesson of the day. The hours passed in a blur of transfiguration exercises and scattered whispers. Even the professors seemed on edge, their spells cast with careful precision, their eyes flicking now and then toward the distant windows or trembling torches. Yet nothing ever fully revealed itself, and the students, at least most of them, chose to ignore the unease. But Elias and Marigold had never been particularly good at leaving mysteries alone. By late afternoon, they returned to Professor Longbottom's classroom for herbology. Neville greeted the class with his usual gentle tone, yet even he seemed distracted. Pots of fluttering ivy quivered as though sensing his mood. "Settle in, everyone," he said, clasping his hands. "Today, we'll be repotting whispering ferns. Be mindful, they don't like sudden movements." They set to work, but only a few minutes passed before the earth inside Elias's pot trembled violently. The fern shivered, its leaves tightening as though bracing for a storm. Across the room, other plants reacted the same way, curling, shrinking, cowering. Neville spun around. "Everyone, stay calm." But it was not the students causing the disturbance. A low hum shook the room, rising from the floorboards, humming through the walls. The glass windows fogged over with a cold breath from nowhere. Through the haze, Elias saw shadows flicker, shadows with no torch to cast them, shadows moving as though alive. Marigold whispered, "It's here again." Neville raised his wand. His voice remained steady, though unease tugged at the edges. "No one panic. This is only the wards shifting. They'll settle in a moment." But they did not settle. The floor gave a sudden lurch, a deep, vibrating jolt, sending students stumbling into desks. The whispering ferns fell silent all at once, leaves stiffening as though frozen. A faint crack echoed through the room, so soft it could have been a distant pebble dropping into a well. Yet Elias felt it like a sharp tug in his chest. The hum faded, the windows cleared, and the moment passed as quickly as it had come. Neville exhaled. Right, that was a bit more forceful than usual. Everyone, leave your plants for now. Class dismissed early. Students hurried out, whispering anxiously. But when Elias and Marigold approached Neville's desk, he gave a slow shake of his head. I can't ignore this anymore, he said quietly. Something beneath the castle is stirring, and it's not natural ward fluctuation. Marigold clasped her hands. Is it dangerous? Possibly. Neville hesitated. But I need to be certain. Headmistress McGonagall called for a meeting this evening. She believes there may be a fault in the ancient protections. And faults, he added softly, have consequences. Elias swallowed. Do you think it's connected to the quill? I think the quill was trying to warn you, Neville said, but I don't yet know what of. He sent them back to their common room with strict instructions to stay alert and avoid wandering off alone. They obeyed, mostly. For though they returned to Gryffindor Tower as told, their minds were ablaze with possibilities, suspicions, and a shared resolve to uncover the truth. As evening deepened, the castle quieted, though the silence felt heavy, strained. Elias sat near the hearth, staring at the flames. Marigold paced behind him, muttering through her list of observations. Other students lounged nearby, blissfully unaware of the castle's unrest. What do we do now? Elias murmured. Marigold paused her pacing. We wait for news from Neville, and we keep our eyes open. But waiting proved impossible. A sudden, sharp clang echoed through the tower, metal striking stone. Every portrait froze mid-sentence. A cold wind rushed down the staircase as though something had passed straight through the walls. Elias felt it again, that shiver of ancient magic, darker now, more insistent. Marigold's eyes widened. It's coming from below. He stood. We should follow it. We should absolutely not follow it, she corrected. Neville specifically said, another clang, closer this time. More urgent. Elias grabbed his cloak. Just far enough to see what it is. Marigold sighed, grabbed her wand, and followed. They slipped out of the tower, descending the spiraling staircase into dim corridors lit only by trembling torchlight. The air grew colder with each step. At the base of the castle's central staircase, they paused. The floor beneath them pulsed, once, twice, like a heartbeat deep underground. Then, the stone cracked. Only a hairline fracture, but enough to send a ribbon of pale, shimmering magic curling upward like smoke. It twisted in the air, forming shapes almost like runes, ancient, unfamiliar, before vanishing. Elias whispered, "That wasn't the castle shifting." Marigold nodded, her face pale. That was something trying to rise. Before they could speak again, a shadow peeled itself from the far wall, quick, silent, and purposeful. A human silhouette slipped around a corner and vanished into the dark. Elias inhaled sharply. "Did you see that?" Marigold gripped his sleeve. "Someone else is down here." The castle moaned, a deep, sorrowful groan. Something beneath Hogwarts had awakened, and someone within Hogwarts wanted it awake. The corridors of the castle lay hushed, their long shadows stretching like dark fingers across the flagstones, as Elias and Marigold crept deeper into the heart of Hogwarts. The faint fracture in the floor behind them still shimmered in Elias's mind, like a half-remembered dream. Yet it was the silent figure they had glimpsed. vanishing around the bend, that quickened their steps. No student should have been wandering here at this hour. No professor either, for that matter. Whoever it was moved with purpose, neither cautious nor hurried, as though the bowels of the castle were familiar ground. Marigold whispered, "We shouldn't be alone down here." Elias nodded, "But we can't go back now." They followed the corridor downward, guided by torches that flickered as though breathing. The air thickened, colder than before, and the stone walls felt strangely damp beneath their fingertips, as though condensation gathered from unseen breaths. The castle here was older than classrooms, older than dormitories, older even than most students knew. A low rumble stirred beneath their feet, faint yet unmistakable. It rolled through the floor like distant thunder buried deep within the earth. Elias slowed, listening. The sound faded, replaced by an eerie stillness. "It's as if the castle is unsettled," Marigold murmured. They rounded another corner and froze. A tapestry lay half-burned upon the floor, its edges singed, though no fire glowed nearby. The woven picture had once shown a knight kneeling before a unicorn, but now the unicorn's form was torn straight down the middle. Opposite the fallen tapestry stood a wall, smooth, unbroken stone, except for a slender crack running vertically along its center. The crack pulsed faintly with silver light. Marigold stepped closer, breath caught in her throat. This wasn't here yesterday. Elias hesitated. Something about the light unsettled him. Gentle and yet impossibly old, tinged with a darkness he could not explain. He reached toward it, hand trembling. "Don't touch it," Marigold warned. He lowered his hand, but the wall itself reacted. The faint pulse quickened. Dim, bright, dim again, like a heartbeat stuttering beneath layers of stone. Loose dust drifted from the ceiling, and then came a whisper. Soft, barely audible, curling through the corridor like mist. A single word. "Closer." Elias staggered back. "Did you hear?" "Yes," Marigold breathed, but no mouth spoke it. Before they could decide what to do, a sound echoed from behind them, quick steps on the stones. They whirled around, wands raised, hearts pounding. But it was not the shadowed figure they had followed. It was Professor Longbottom. His robes were hastily thrown over his clothes, his wand lit, his expression taut with worry. "What are you two doing here?" he whispered sharply, though his voice held more fear than anger. "I told you to go nowhere near the lower corridors." "We followed someone," Elias blurted. "Someone who shouldn't be down here." Neville moved past them, gaze drawn immediately to the cracked wall. The pulsing light reflected in his eyes, and for a moment he looked strangely young, like the uncertain boy he had once been, before determination hardened his features. "This is worse than I feared," he murmured. "A ward fault large enough to manifest physically. The instability is spreading." Marigold asked quietly, "Is something trying to break through?" Neville didn't answer at first. He pressed his palm close to the crack, never touching, and closed his eyes, listening. A tremor coursed through the stone, faint but unmistakable. When he opened his eyes again, they held both dread and resolve. "There is something behind this wall," he said. "Something old enough that the founders built layers of protective magic around it. Those spells have held for centuries, until now." Elias felt his stomach twist. Did the war weaken it? "Perhaps," Neville said softly. "Or perhaps the war merely awakened whatever sleeps beyond." He lowered his hand, turning to the children with grave calm. "You must return to your common room, now, and breathe not a word of this to anyone." But the person we followed, Marigold began. Neville raised a hand. Leave that to the professors. If someone intends to meddle with ancient protections, we must tread carefully. He stepped back, lifting his wand to seal off the passage. A shimmer of golden light spread across the hall, forming a temporary barrier. The pulsing crack dimmed slightly behind it, but the heartbeat-like rhythm continued, steady, patient. Elias and Marigold exchanged a look that needed no words. This was no random anomaly, no harmless flicker of enchantment. Something in the foundations of Hogwarts was stirring, and someone within the castle sought to rouse it. Neville guided them upward, past twisting staircases and quiet portraits who watched with uncharacteristic silence. When they reached the landing near Gryffindor Tower, he stopped. "I know your courage," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "And your curiosity. But there are forces in this castle older than any wizard alive. If they wake in the wrong way, Hogwarts itself could fall. Promise me you will not return to the lower halls alone." Elias hesitated, then nodded. Marigold did the same. Satisfied but still worried, Neville departed, heading toward the headmistress's office with hurried steps. Elias waited until he disappeared from sight. Then Marigold whispered, "We're going back down there, aren't we?" He swallowed. "We have to. Someone else is trying to open that crack. And if they succeed," she said softly, "the thing behind the wall will awaken." A gust of cold wind swept through the corridor, though no window stood open. It wrapped around them like a warning, or a summons. Far below, deep in the foundations where ancient stone met forgotten enchantment, the crack pulsed once more. Bright, dark, bright, like something testing its strength against the prison that had held it so long, like something waiting to be called. Night fell once more upon Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and though the stars shimmered above the towers, a restless tension coiled within the ancient walls. Elias lay awake in his four-poster bed, staring up at the velvet canopy as shadows drifted across it. Sleep would not come, not while the memory of the pulsing crack haunted him. Silver light flickering like a trapped heartbeat beneath the stone. Across the dormitory, Marigold's bed curtains rustled quietly. A moment later, her whisper drifted through the dimness. "Elias." He sat up. "You can't sleep either." "No. Not with that light still flickering in my mind." She stepped softly into view, her wand tip glowing faintly. "The castle is breathing strangely. Listen." He did. At first he heard only the soft snores of their classmates, but beneath that, far beneath, he sensed something deeper. A faint vibration threading through the floorboards, subtle as the tremor of distant wings. "It's growing stronger," Elias murmured. "Whatever lies below knows the wards are failing." Marigold nodded. "And if someone's trying to weaken them further?" Neither wished to finish the thought. With silent agreement, they dressed and slipped from the tower, moving like shadows through the winding staircases. The portraits watched them with uneasy curiosity. Even the usually talkative ones held their tongues. The castle's lanterns flickered low as if reluctant to reveal what lay ahead. When they reached the main corridor leading toward the lower floors, Elias felt the air shift, colder, heavier, wrapped with the faint tang of ancient magic. The golden barrier Neville had conjured shimmered faintly far down the hall. But something was wrong. The glow was weaker. Marigold quickened her pace. "The barrier. Look at it." Cracks of darkened light veined through the golden shield, as though invisible claws had scraped across its surface. The magic drained in slow, shuddering pulses, growing fainter with every breath. Someone had tampered with it. Elias whispered, "We're too late. Whoever we saw earlier, they came back." But the corridor was empty. No figure lurked in the shadows. No footsteps echoed. Only the weakening light told the tale. They approached cautiously. The barrier gave a final flicker. Gold, dimmer gold, then nothing. It dissolved into thin air, leaving the corridor open once more. The crack in the wall pulsed in the darkness, brighter than before. Darkness threaded its edges like roots burrowing outward through stone. Marigold swallowed hard. "It's spreading." Elias stepped closer, lifting his wand. Lumos. The beam cut across the ancient stones, revealing new fractures spidering across the wall. The heartbeat-like pulse quickened, as if sensing their presence. Then something stirred within the crack. A whisper unfurled. Not a voice exactly, but an echo. A memory of sound. A breath of something old and waiting. "Closer." Marigold shivered. "It knows we're here." But before Elias could speak, a soft scrape sounded behind them. They whirled, wands raised, and a tall figure stepped from the shadows. Professor Sinistra. Her star-speckled robes shimmered faintly beneath the torchlight, though her face looked drawn, her eyes shadowed. She regarded the children with a strange calm, neither surprised nor alarmed to find them here. "You should not be wandering at this hour," she said quietly. Elias and Marigold exchanged a confused glance. Sinistra rarely left the astronomy tower at night. Her presence here felt wrong somehow, out of rhythm with every memory they had of her. Marigold spoke carefully. "Professor, the wards are failing. We saw someone come down here earlier. They were heading toward the crack." Sinistra's expression didn't change. "Yes," she murmured. "Many things stir beneath these stones." She stepped closer, and the light of the crack reflected in her eyes, silver and dark, flickering strangely. Elias tightened his grip on his wand. "Professor, have you seen anyone?" She tilted her head, studying the crack. For a moment, her face softened with something like reverence or longing. Then she whispered, "Magic older than the Founders waits behind that wall. Magic that has not been heard for centuries." Marigold's breath caught. "Professor, how do you know that?" But Sinistra did not answer. Instead, she reached out a hand toward the fracture. Elias reacted instantly. "Stop!" Her fingers hovered inches from the pulsing light. The crack flared, silver erupting outward in a sudden burst that forced Elias and Marigold to shield their eyes. A gust of wind tore through the corridor, lifting dust and loose stone. Sinistra staggered back, blinking as though waking from a trance. "This magic," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It calls to those who listen." Elias stepped forward. "Professor, something is wrong. You shouldn't be here. None of us should." But the corridor groaned, a deep, ominous rumble that shook the walls. The floor trembled beneath their feet as fragments of stone cracked and shifted. Marigold grabbed Elias's arm. "It's breaking through!" The crack widened in a sudden burst, just an inch, but enough for a rush of cold air to spill forth, swirling around them with the chill of forgotten centuries. Elias felt something brush the edges of his mind, searching, probing, as though trying to understand him. Sinistra staggered away, clutching her head. I shouldn't have come. The moon's alignment must have..." She stopped abruptly, eyes widening at something only she could sense. "Go, both of you. Leave this place before it awakens further." And then, without waiting for their response, she turned and fled up the corridor, her robes whispering behind her. Elias and Marigold stared after her. That was not normal, Marigold whispered. No, Elias agreed. And she wasn't the person we saw earlier. Someone else is still down here. A gust of cold wind swept from the crack, scattering dust across the floor. The pulse of light replied, slow, steady, waiting. Marigold drew a shaky breath. Elias, I think something inside the wall is trying to find a way into the castle. And someone, Elias said softly, is helping it. The shadows trembled around them. Far below, deeper than any torchlight could reach, the ancient force stirred again, no longer patient, no longer dreaming, awakening. The next morning rose gray and heavy, as though the sky itself sensed the unrest curling through the castle's ancient stones. A hush hung over the great hall. Students whispered in tight clusters, their glances flickering toward the high windows where the light felt dimmer than it should have been. Even the enchanted ceiling, usually aglow with dawn's splendor, showed only a muted sky, as if clouds smothered something far more troubling than simple weather. Elias and Marigold sat side by side, untouched porridge growing cold before them. Neither spoke. Their thoughts, tangled and restless, drifted back to the lower corridor, to the pulsing crack, and to the strange look in Professor Sinistra's eyes when the ancient magic had flared. At last, Marigold folded her hands, her voice low. She wasn't herself last night. Elias nodded grimly. It was like something was calling her, pulling her toward the crack. A burst of chair scraping echoed across the hall as Neville approached their table. He carried a stack of parchments under one arm, but the weariness in his expression dwarfed them. He lowered his voice so only they could hear. You were seen returning to Gryffindor Tower just before dawn, he said gently but firmly. We need to speak. They followed him into an empty classroom. Dust motes drifted in the still air. Neville closed the door with a flick of his wand and turned to face them, the lines in his forehead deepening. You went back, he said, not as a question but a certainty. Elias swallowed. We had to. Something was happening. Someone was tampering with the barrier. Neville paced once, twice, then stopped, gripping the edge of a desk as though steadying himself. The headmistress and I strengthened the protective layers at dawn, but they were weakened again before we arrived. Not destroyed, only touched, manipulated. Marigold frowned. By who? That is what troubles me, Neville replied. Sinistra was found wandering the west stairwell in a daze not long after sunrise. She remembers nothing of the night, and she is deeply shaken, but she is not responsible. Elias stiffened. Professor, we saw someone down there 2 nights ago, someone who knew the corridors well. Yes, Neville murmured, and I fear this person understands far more than they should about the Founder's safeguards. He paused, then added more quietly, there are secrets in this castle even I have not been told. Some magic lies so old and tightly bound that only fragments of its history remain. Marigold stepped closer. Professor, the thing behind the wall, what is it? Neville hesitated. The lamplight flickered across his face, revealing uncertainty he did not often show. In the earliest years of Hogwarts, he began, the Founders wove protective enchantments unlike any used today. They created guardians, sentient forces bound to the stone, tasked with shielding the castle from threats no one alive has seen. But not all these guardians remained pure. Ages shift, wars rise, and great magic does not always sleep peacefully. Elias felt a chill creep down his spine. So the thing behind the wall is one of them? Perhaps, Neville said. But if it was corrupted, twisted by centuries of conflict, It may no longer serve the purpose it once did, and someone might believe they can control it. A silence stretched, thick with dread. Then Neville straightened, determination tightening his voice. You two have sharp instincts, but this is growing more dangerous by the hour. Until we understand what we are facing, I must insist you keep to safer parts of the castle. Elias and Marigold exchanged a look. Both knew they would not simply stand aside, not when something was hunting within the walls, not when whispers called from ancient stone, but they nodded, for Neville's worry was genuine. He dismissed them just as the bell rang in the distance. As they stepped into the corridor, Elias felt the floor shift beneath his feet. A tiny tremor, but unmistakable. Marigold felt it too. The wards are trembling again, she whispered. Throughout the day, the tremors came and went in subtle waves. Bookshelves shivered, torches flickered nerve-like, staircases paused mid-motion, confused before continuing their turns. During charms, a gust of cold air swept through the classroom and extinguished every candle at once. The students gasped. The professor struggled to relight the lamps. Whispers grew. Is it Peeves? Maybe the castle's still damaged. No, this feels different. By evening, uncertainty knitted itself into the very atmosphere. The shadows lengthened more quickly than usual, stretching across the floors like living things. Elias felt them watching him. Not malicious, yet, but searching. He and Marigold met near the library just after dinner, when the corridors grew quiet. We can't wait for answers, Marigold said. Something is accelerating. The crack widened after last night. What if it widens again? Elias nodded. Neville said someone is manipulating the wards. We have to find out who. They ventured deeper into the library, seeking records older than any class syllabus. Dusty shelves towered above them like ancient sentinels. The restricted section loomed quiet and forbidding beyond its locked gate, but they did not need to enter it. They needed the shelves forgotten by most, those holding crumbling histories of the castle itself. Marigold scanned spines with quick eyes. This one, she whispered, sliding out a thick, brittle book. Foundations of the First Enchantments. They carried it to a small table in a shadowed alcove and opened it carefully. Dust drifted like pale mist. Within the pages lay diagrams of ancient ward runes, descriptions of protective spirits bound into stone, and marginal notes written centuries ago by long-dead scholars. Elias turned pages, and more fragments emerged, mentions of a guardian born of light and shadow, a sentinel beneath the heart of the castle, and a sealed breach from which no echo must awaken. Then they found a faded sketch, rough, almost frantic. It showed a cavernous chamber deep beneath Hogwarts, a swirling mass of silver fire at its center, bound by 4 runic anchors. One symbol had been scribbled over and over. Containment must not falter. Marigold touched the page with trembling fingers. This is what's behind the wall. Elias's heart pounded. If one of the anchors failed, the containment would weaken, she finished. And if someone were interfering... A cold draft swept through the alcove, turning the pages as though invisible hands searched with them. Elias snapped the book shut. That wasn't the wind. Marigold grabbed the book and stuffed it into her satchel. We need to tell Neville. But as they stepped into the corridor, every torch along the walls extinguished at once. Darkness swallowed everything. A whisper curled through the black, soft, patient, no longer calling, but beckoning. Come. Elias grabbed Marigold's hand. The castle itself was guiding them, or warning them. And somewhere below, in the deep hollow heart of Hogwarts, the ancient guardian stirred, unraveling the last of its bindings as the saboteur worked unseen. The confrontation between good and evil had already begun. Darkness wrapped the corridor like a living veil, thick and impenetrable. Elias held Marigold's hand tightly as they stood motionless, the sudden silence pressing on their ears. Not a whisper of wind, not the faintest footstep from distant halls, only the slow pounding of their own hearts. Then the whisper came again, not from the walls, not from the floor, from everywhere at once. "Come." Marigold trembled beside him. "It's guiding us. Or hunting us." Elias raised his wand, whispering, "Lumos." A feeble glow flickered at the tip, far weaker than it should have been, yet enough to cast a small halo of light. The corridor stretched before them like an endless tunnel. The torches remained dead, as though snuffed by something that hungered for light. "We can't stay here," Elias said softly. "The castle wants us moving." They walked slowly, each step measured. The faint glow quivered whenever the whisper passed through the air, as though the very magic around them shuddered. With each step, Elias felt the castle descending into a deeper hush. Even the portraits slept, their painted faces turned away as though unwilling to witness what stirred. Marigold glanced behind them. "The darkness! It's following us!" And it was. The deeper shadows seemed to creep along the floor, stretching thin fingers that retreated only when Elias's dim wand light touched them. After several turns, they reached a staircase spiraling downward. Elias recognized it. It led toward the unused storerooms above the dungeons. The whisper echoed faintly from below. Marigold hesitated. "This path takes us closer to the foundations. That's where the breach is. Whoever tampered with the wards must be heading there." They descended. The air grew colder, almost damp, and every few steps a shiver raced down Elias's arms, as though unseen eyes watched him from the corners of the stairwell. At the bottom, the staircase opened into a narrow stone corridor. Broken crates lay scattered along the walls, some collapsed under age, others torn apart as if something had clawed through them. Cobwebs trembled, though no wind touched them. A faint silver glow pulsed ahead. Marigold drew a sharp breath. "That's it. The light from the crack. It's reaching this far now." The stone beneath their feet thrummed with power, unsteady, feverish. Soft vibrations traveled through their souls, as though the ancient magic below struggled against restraints that had held for centuries. Suddenly, Elias froze. Footsteps, not theirs. Soft, deliberate, steady. Someone was just ahead. Elias extinguished his wand light with a flick, plunging them into darkness. The whisper fell silent at once, as though retreating to watch rather than speak. They pressed against the wall, breaths held. The footsteps grew louder. A silhouette appeared at the far end of the corridor, faintly lit by the pulsing glow. Cloaked in black, hood drawn low. The figure walked with certainty, without hesitation, as though following a path long memorized. Marigold leaned close to Elias's ear. "That's the one we saw nights ago." The figure raised a hand and produced a thin silver runestone etched with swirling symbols. As the figure passed beneath the glow, the symbols flared white. A ward attuning stone. Elias's stomach clenched. "They're using ancient runes," Marigold whispered. "Only someone with deep knowledge of the Founder's enchantments could use that. But who?" Before she could finish, the figure reached a heavy steel door embedded in the stone. Elias had never seen it before. The air around it shimmered faintly, as though veiled by a thin layer of magic. The figure touched the runestone to the door. The metal glowed. The door groaned open. Beyond it lay a stairway descending into darkness far deeper than the corridors above. A draft escaped the opening, cold as winter, heavy with old enchantments straining against the intrusion. The pulse of the breach quickened, echoing through their bones. Elias felt the ancient magic brush against him, searching. The cloaked figure stepped inside. Elias whispered, "We have to follow them." Marigold seized his arm. "Elias, wait. We don't know what's down there." "I know. But if we don't follow them, they'll open whatever lies beneath this castle." Marigold's breath trembled, yet she nodded. They hurried toward the door, keeping low and silent. As they reached it, the last flicker of the metal's glow faded, and the heavy door began slowly swinging shut. Elias slipped inside just before it closed, pulling Marigold with him. The steel sealed behind them with a resounding thud. Darkness swallowed everything, but the ancient magic sensed new intruders. A hum spread through the stairwell. Faint runes carved into the walls began flickering to life, dim silver symbols that pulsed in time with the heartbeat beneath the castle. Marigold breathed out in awe. "These enchantments, they're thousands of years old." They descended the spiraling steps. With each turn, Elias felt the pull of the breach growing stronger, like a magnetic force drawing them toward the heart of the castle. His skin prickled with every pulse, as if the air vibrated against him. At the bottom of the staircase, they emerged into a vast cavernous hall. Elias froze. The chamber stretched wider than any space he had imagined beneath Hogwarts. 4 towering pillars ringed the center of the hall, each etched with runes glowing faintly. But the greatest sight lay in the heart of the cavern, a swirling expanse of silver fire bound within a fractured spherical barrier. The breach. It pulsed like a heartbeat. Bright, dark, bright. Marigold whispered, "It's magnificent and terrifying." The cloaked figure stood at the edge of the breach, raising the runestone once more. They spoke a quiet incantation that echoed unnaturally through the chamber. Stone groaned. One of the 4 pillars flickered, then dimmed. Elias's heart tightened. "They're weakening the anchors." Without thinking, he stepped forward. Behind him, the cavern shuddered violently. A gust of silver flame lashed outward from the breach, striking the far wall with a deafening crack. Dust rained from the ceiling, and the heartbeat of the ancient guardian thundered through the chamber. The cloaked figure turned sharply. Their hood fell back. Marigold gasped, "Professor Sinistra." But her eyes, those gentle, starlit eyes, were wrong. They glowed faintly silver, reflecting the breach's light, and her expression was not her own. It twisted with an anguish far too deep, as though 2 wills fought within her. "Professor?" Elias whispered. She flinched, distressed. Her voice came strained, double-layered. One voice hers, the other older, colder. "Leave, while you still can. I cannot control its call." The breach pulsed violently. A tendril of silver flame reached toward her, brushing her sleeve like a beckoning hand, and her will buckled. The older voice spoke through her lips. "The guardian wakes, and its vessel must be made ready." The ground lurched. The pillars dimmed further. The guardian roared from within the breach, a raw, awakening power no human voice could match. Elias grabbed Marigold's hand. There was no time left. The ancient force beneath Hogwarts was no longer sleeping. It was rising. The cavern trembled beneath their feet, dust spilling like mist from the ancient archways. Elias tightened his grip on Marigold's hand as the breach roared, its silver flames spiraling with new ferocity. The 4 runic pillars flickered erratically, bright, dim, dark, until their pulses fell out of harmony and the chamber groaned in protest. Professor Sinistra staggered backward, the light in her eyes wavering like a lantern caught in a storm. Her robes fluttered in the torrent of magical wind, and for a heartbeat, Elias glimpsed the teacher he knew, frightened, fighting an unseen force that scraped at her mind. Then the other presence surged. Her gaze snapped upward, and the cavern fell silent, as though the air itself obeyed her. The voice that emerged from her lips was deeper than the pit below, old enough to remember centuries. Not hers. The anchors weaken, the vessel responds. Soon the guardian shall cross the veil. Marigold took a trembling step forward. "Professor, fight it! Please, this isn't you!" Sinistra's eyes flickered wildly as though 2 storms clashed beneath them. Her fingers twitched open and shut at her sides. "I tried," she whispered, her own voice breaking through. "It calls to me, through the stars themselves. I cannot silence it." Another pulse from the breach struck the cavern floor, cracking the stone with a sound like lightning splitting the earth. Elias shielded Marigold as fragments scattered around them. "We must get her away from it," he said urgently. "The breach is controlling her." A blast of silver fire hurled toward them. Marigold shoved Elias aside. The blast struck the ground between them, sending both tumbling. Elias rolled behind a half-toppled pillar fragment, coughing as dust filled the air. Sinistra lifted her hand. The swirling flames mirrored her movement, obedient, hungry. "The vessel must clear the path," the older voice intoned. Then the breach pulsed once more, and something began forcing its way outward. A silhouette formed within the swirling sphere of silver fire, a shape like coiling smoke, neither human nor beast. Long limbs unfolded, and an eyeless head pressed against the barrier from within. The barrier strained, warping under its weight. Marigold's voice cracked. "The Guardian! It's nearly free!" Elias forced himself upright, scanning for anything that might help them stop what was unfolding. His gaze locked on the runic pillars. 3 still flickered, though faintly. Only 1 remained steady. "The anchors!" he shouted. "They're what bind the Guardian." Marigold's eyes widened. "If we restore them somehow—" A scream tore through the chamber. Sinistra had collapsed to her knees, clutching her head with both hands as the breach lashed her with silver tendrils. The light in her eyes pulsed violently, consuming the last traces of her strength. Elias ran toward her before he had time to think. The magical wind nearly knocked him back, but he pressed forward, each step a struggle. "Professor," he cried, "you have to fight it." Her voice came fractured. "I cannot. It pulled me down here, night after night. Its whispers in the stars. The alignment opened a path." "The stars didn't guide you," Elias said fiercely. "The Guardian deceived you, and it will destroy you if you let it take control." Something in her flickered. Remorse, fear, humanity. For the briefest moment, her eyes cleared. "Run," she whispered, "before it chooses you too." Elias shook his head. "We're not abandoning you." A sudden shockwave erupted from the breach, hurling him backward. He struck the floor hard and slid across the stone. As he struggled up, the Guardian's form pressed harder against the barrier, leaving cracks of silver fire spidering outward. The pillars flared weakly, protesting. Marigold joined Elias at his side. Her voice trembled, yet her eyes burned with determination. "We can't overpower the Guardian, but maybe we can reinforce the anchors, long enough for Neville and the headmistress to reach us." Elias nodded. "How?" She pulled the ancient book from her satchel, the one they'd taken from the library. It flew open on its own, pages turning rapidly until stopping on the sketch of the cavern. 4 runes, 4 anchors, 4 sigils that bound the guardian to its prison. "We need to reawaken the symbols," Marigold said breathlessly. "If even one stabilizes, it might disrupt the guardian's control over Professor Sinistra." Elias scanned the pillars. "You take the east one, I'll take the west." They sprinted in opposite directions. Marigold reached her pillar first. Its rune, formed of twisting lines and curves, flickered weakly, almost extinguished. She raised her wand, voice steady despite her shaking hands. "Reviviscer!" A spark of gold leapt from her wand, striking the rune. The pillar shuddered, then glowed faintly brighter. The guardian screamed. Its voice was not sound but force, pressing against their minds, rattling the stone, turning their bones cold. Elias had reached his own pillar. He raised his wand. "Reviviscere!" But his pillar did not brighten. Instead, its rune cracked further, and the light dimmed. No, not now," Elias muttered desperately. Behind him, Sinistra staggered to her feet, body rigid as the presence inside her took control again. The older voice thundered through her. "Cease your meddling." She raised both hands toward Elias, and a torrent of silver fire lashed out. Marigold screamed his name. Elias dove aside. The fire missed by inches, carving a molten scar through the stone where he had stood. The breach pulsed again, monstrous, eager. The guardian's arm, an elongated limb of writhing fire, broke through the barrier. The cavern shook violently. The remaining pillars flickered in agony. The barrier thinned. Marigold hurried to Elias's side. "Are you hurt?" "No." He winced. "But the pillar won't respond." She bit her lip. The runes might need more than a spell. They were designed to be renewed by multiple casters. The founders worked in pairs or groups. She stared at Elias. "We'll cast together." They dashed back to the unstable pillar, raising their wands in unison. "Reviviscere!" Light burst from both wands, spiraling toward the rune. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the pillar shuddered. Its rune brightened, slowly, gingerly, but brightened. The guardian roared in fury. Sinistra clutched her chest, gasping as though struggling for breath. The silver glow in her eyes flickered with instability. "It's working!" Elias shouted. "She's resisting!" Another crack ripped through the barrier. The guardian forced a second limb through, clawing in their direction. Magic whipped through the chamber like a hurricane, scattering debris. Marigold's voice trembled. "We can't hold it much longer. Just a little more." Before they could complete the stabilizing spell, a surge of destructive force exploded from the guardian's body, shattering the far pillar entirely. Light burst outward. The anchor crumbled, and the barrier, now uneven and fractured, began to fail. Sinistra collapsed again, screaming. The guardian pressed forward, half emerged, towering and wrathful, its form coiling like living fire ready to strike. Elias froze, horror jolting through him. Marigold whispered, No, we're too late." The guardian was not merely waking, it was breaking free. The chamber heaved like a living beast, its long dormant heart beating once more with dreadful purpose. Dust cascaded from the vaulted heights, and the air trembled beneath the rising force as the guardian's fiery limbs pressed through the collapsing barrier. The silver flames twisted and howled, bending light around them until the cavern seemed to warp and stretch. Elias shielded his eyes, but even through his fingers he felt the heat, an ancient heat, colder than ice and hotter than fire, a paradox born of magic older than memory. Marigold staggered backward, nearly losing her footing as shards of stone broke free and clattered across the uneven floor. Professor Sinistra lay motionless near the base of a pillar, her form small and fragile beneath the towering presence that sought to claim her. The silver shimmer in her eyes pulsed faintly, like embers refusing to die. Elias tried to run to her, but the ground lurched, forcing him to brace against a fractured slab. "Stay back," Marigold warned, her voice thin with fear. "The Guardian's presence is overwhelming her. If you get too close, it may seize you instead." "I can't just leave her," Elias shouted. Another pulse surged from the Guardian, stronger than before. The remaining pillars quivered, their runes flashing in chaotic bursts. The chamber's protective enchantments, strained to the very brink, fought desperately to counter the spreading corruption. Marigold grabbed Elias's arm. "We must reinforce the surviving anchors before the barrier shatters completely." Elias nodded, though dread twisted in his stomach. 2 pillars remained strong enough to respond, while a third flickered like a dying candle. The 4th lay in ruins, its runes shattered beyond repair. "We need to restore at least the unstable pillar," Marigold said, breathless. "If 3 stand, perhaps the Guardian's emergence will slow." She sprinted toward the flickering pillar, and Elias followed. The Guardian let out a sound, neither cry nor roar, but something deeper, a resonance that shook their bones and tore at their minds. Elias felt something claw against the edges of his thoughts, searching for an opening to slip inside. He forced the intrusion back with sheer will. No, he would not let it claim him. Marigold reached the pillar first and pressed her hands against the cold stone. Her wand trembled in her grasp. "Help me stabilize it. Our spells alone won't be enough. We must align its magic with the others." "How do we do that?" Elias demanded. She flipped open the ancient book again, pages fluttering wildly until a diagram of interlocking runes came into view. "Follow my timing. We cast not at the same moment, but in sequence, like steps of a pattern." The Guardian lashed out again, this time with a tendril of spiraling flame that struck the far wall, sending cracks racing upward. The force of it nearly knocked the book from Marigold's hands. "Hurry!" she cried. Elias raised his wand. Marigold began the first incantation, her voice steady despite the quake beneath her feet. "Reviviscere prima." Her pillar sparked faintly, its rune twisting as if awakening from a troubled sleep. "Now you!" she shouted. "Reviviscere secunda." The weakened pillar pulsed, its rune brightening a shade. The Guardian writhed, flames snapping like furious serpents. A shockwave flared from its half-emerged torso, throwing Elias to his knees. "Again!" Marigold called, her voice nearly drowned by the tempest. They cast in rhythm, one spell from her, one from him, each reinforcing the other, each tightening the fraying weave around the ancient anchor. Slowly, painfully slowly, the weak rune grew more luminous. Then, a deeper pulse rumbled through the chamber. The Guardian had noticed. It turned its faceless head toward them, its eyeless gaze searing through the swirling flames. Elias felt a coldness chew through his spine, a sense of utter insignificance beneath an ancient power that had watched centuries drift by like falling leaves. The Guardian extended one enormous limb toward them, its fiery fingers stretching to engulf the pillar and the 2 children beside it. Marigold screamed. Elias shoved her aside as the flames struck the stone column. The pillar shuddered violently, sparks spraying like embers from a collapsing forge. Elias's arm blazed with sudden pain, though the flames had barely grazed him. But the pillar endured. "Elias!" Marigold cried, scrambling back to him. "Are you hurt?" He gritted his teeth. Just keep going." She nodded, swallowing fear, and returned to the rune. The guardian drew back momentarily, gathering its strength for a second strike. Elias staggered upright, leaning heavily on the pillar. His vision blurred, but he saw Sinistra in the distance, still alive, still trembling beneath the crushing weight of the guardian's influence. He would not let her fall. He would not let Hogwarts fall. He lifted his wand once more. "Reviviscera!" A deafening blast cut him off. The guardian slammed both limbs against the barrier's fractured surface, and silver fire exploded outward, engulfing the chamber in blinding radiance. The last functioning anchor shrieked in protest, if stone could scream, and its rune flickered wildly, as though torn between duty and destruction. For a heartbeat, Elias thought the cavern would collapse entirely. But then, miraculously, the stabilizing pillar they had repaired flared to life, its rune burning bright gold. The light surged through the cavern, striking the other pillars, weaving a tenuous network that held, just barely, against the guardian's push. The barrier trembled but did not yet break. The guardian recoiled, surprised. Sinistra collapsed fully, her chest heaving, the silver glow in her eyes dimming as the connection weakened. Marigold gasped for breath, leaning against the pillar with tears in her eyes. "We did it, Elias, we did it. We bought time." But Elias knew too well. It was only time, nothing more. The guardian hovered at the brink, half born into the world, its form shifting restlessly like a storm denied its path. Every breath it took, if such a being breathed, sent ripples through the shattered stone. Marigold wiped her eyes and steadied herself. "We must get Professor Sinistra out. If the guardian loses control of her completely..." A chilling whisper unfurled behind them. "She cannot leave." Both spun around. Sinistra stood, but her posture was no longer her own. Her limbs moved like a puppet's, halting, unnatural. Her head tilted as though listening to a voice only she could hear. And when she lifted her face, the silver glow had returned. Brighter than ever, the ancient voice spoke through her lips. "The vessel remains bound. The vessel shall not depart." Elias stepped protectively in front of Marigold. "We won't let you take her." The guardian responded with a roar of flame that shook the cavern's foundation. The ancient evil had chosen its herald, its host, its unwilling voice in the world of the living. And now that host blocked their escape, eyes blazing, power rising, and a will far older than her own twisting every word she spoke. "None shall leave," the guardian hissed through her. "Not until the awakening is complete." The cavern's air thickened as though the very stone had inhaled and held its breath. Elias felt his heartbeat hammering at his ribs, each pulse sharp enough to hurt. Professor Sinistra, once gentle, quiet, a woman who studied stars rather than shadows, now stood before them like a figure sculpted from moonlight and nightmare. Her eyes glowed with the guardian's restless fury, and silver veins of magic shimmered beneath her skin, threading through her like roots burrowing into unwilling earth. Marigold whispered, "She's fighting it. I know she is." But the voice that rose from Sinistra's throat was not her own. "The awakening proceeds. The vessel must remain." Each word rolled with the weight of ages, hollow and cold, as if spoken from far beyond the mortal world. The ground trembled violently. One of the damaged pillars cracked further, sending shards of stone clattering down. Elias knew that if even one more anchor failed, the barrier would fall entirely, and the guardian would emerge unbound. "We need to move," Elias murmured. But Sinistra stepped forward. The flames wreathing the Guardian responded instantly, flaring brighter, drawn to her like a tether. Light wound around her arms, her fingers, her chest, as though the Guardian meant to mold her into something new. "No," Elias whispered, horror tightening his throat. "It's fortifying its hold." Sinistra raised her hand. A lance of silver shot toward them, swift as lightning. Elias pulled Marigold down just in time. The spell struck the cavern wall behind them, carving a deep, glowing scar. Pebbles rained in a shower of sparks. Marigold scrambled to her feet, breathing hard. "We can't fight her. Not directly." "No," Elias agreed, "but we can distract her." A second bolt flew, this one aimed lower. Elias leapt aside, but the spell seared across his shoulder, burning cold rather than hot. He bit back a cry. "Elias!" Marigold grasped him. "Are you—" "I'm fine," he lied through clenched teeth. "It's nothing." A rumble vibrated through the cavern, slow, rhythmic. The Guardian was pushing harder against the barrier. The half-formed silhouette inside the sphere writhed, forcing its shoulders through the fractured shell. Massive coils of silver fire slithered around its emerging limbs. Every push sent shockwaves through the crumbling chamber. Marigold stared, her face pale. "We can't stop that thing alone." "But we don't have to stop it," Elias said. "We just need to hold it back long enough for help to arrive." Her eyes flicked across the cavern. "If the other pillars can be rekindled—" A shadow fell over them. Sinistra surged forward, faster than seemed possible, her robes billowing like the cloak of a storm. Her eyes locked onto Marigold with cold purpose. "The girl hides knowledge," the Guardian's voice rumbled. "She seeks to hinder the awakening." Marigold stumbled backward. Sinistra raised her wand, her hand trembling as though she resisted her own movements, and silver magic formed into a rotating bolt. "No!" Elias shouted, throwing himself between them, but Sinistra faltered. The bolt flickered. For a heartbeat, just one, her eyes cleared, wide with fear. "Elias, go!" Then the Guardian seized her again, wrenching away that sliver of humanity. The bolt reformed, growing brighter, sharper. Elias braced himself. But at that moment, the cavern floor split open beside them, stone cracking like a shell beneath a hammer. A plume of golden sparks erupted, and a familiar voice echoed through the uproar. "Protego Maxima." A shimmering arc of golden force slammed into place, deflecting the bolt. It shattered against the shield, spraying harmless fragments of silver light. Neville Longbottom stood at the base of the stairwell, wand raised high, robes tattered and dust-smeared as though he had torn through half the castle to reach them. Behind him followed 3 other professors, Flitwick, Hooch, and Headmistress McGonagall herself. Marigold gasped in relief. "Professor!" Neville sprinted forward. "Stay behind us!" But the Guardian reacted instantly. The silver flames lashed out, sweeping across the cavern like a tidal wave. The professors formed a defensive half-circle. "Hold the line," McGonagall commanded. Light erupted, gold, blue, white, spells weaving into a shimmering barrier of resistance. The Guardian hissed, recoiling from the combined force. Sinistra clutched her temples, wavering beneath the clash of powers. The Guardian's will pulsated through her body, trying to maintain control, but the presence of so many magical forces disrupted its grip. Neville turned sharply. "Elias! Marigold! You must leave! Now!" "No," Marigold said, breathless. "We helped stabilize the pillars. They still need—" But she did not finish. Because the Guardian slammed its full weight against the barrier, the entire cavern heaved. A deafening roar split the air. One of the supporting arches cracked, sending boulders crashing down. The runic pillars flared wildly, their light flickering between life and death. McGonagall's voice rose above the chaos. Flitwick, reinforce the western pillar. Hooch, assist Neville with the northern anchor. Quickly! Spells streaked like comets across the chamber, each beam striking a pillar to inject strength into the failing enchantments. For a moment, the barrier holding the Guardian flickered back into stability. But only for a moment. The Guardian forced another limb outward. The sphere bulged and cracked. Silver fire poured through the widening fractures. Elias stared, horror tightening every muscle. It's breaking free. Neville's jaw clenched. We cannot hold it for long. Elias, get Marigold out. But the path to the stairwell was blocked now by fallen stone and searing flames. Marigold clutched Elias's arm. There's no way out. The Guardian pulled one massive arm fully free, its form twisting with rage. The cavern quaked, runes flickered, spells strained. And then Sinistra screamed. This time it was her scream, not the Guardian's. A raw, agonized cry as she fell to her knees, clutching her chest. The silver glow in her eyes surged, then splintered. Thin streams of silver magic tore themselves from her body, drawn forcefully back toward the breach. Sinistra collapsed, gasping, her limbs shaking violently. McGonagall cried out, "The Guardian is severing its hold." Neville shouted, "No, it is abandoning her because it no longer needs a vessel." Marigold's eyes widened with terror. It's strong enough to manifest on its own. Indeed, Neville murmured grimly, and now nothing stands between it and full emergence. As if hearing him, the Guardian lunged again, its burning form expanding, tearing through the barrier's final protections. The runes screamed, sparks exploded, pillars cracked. Then all at once, the chamber fell still. Elias felt a terrible quiet press against his ears. The Guardian stood half-emerged, flames swirling, its immense form poised like a creature at the edge of waking. Then, one more crack, a sound like ancient stone breaking, and the barrier shattered. The Guardian was free. The breach gave way with a sound like the rending of the sky. A blast of silver-white fire surged outward, sweeping across the cavern and extinguishing every torch, every flicker of mortal light. For a moment, Elias saw nothing, only the blinding storm of magic. Then the radiance thinned, like mist retreating before dawn, and the Guardian's full shape rose from within the shattered sphere. It towered above them, a being of swirling flame and shadow, its limbs long and sinuous, its torso shaped as though carved from molten moonlight. It had no face, only a shifting suggestion of one, an ever-changing distortion, as if the storm itself had learned the shape of a creature and copied it imperfectly. Its presence pressed upon the mind like a weight of ages, older than languages, older than the stones beneath their feet. Elias felt his knees weaken. Marigold clutched his sleeve, breathless, unable to look away. The professors braced themselves. "Hold your ground," shouted Phileas Flitwick, his voice small but sharp as steel. Beside him, Rolanda Hooch drew her wand with both hands, steadying herself like a duelist preparing for a mortal charge. And at the forefront stood Minerva McGonagall, her gaze unwavering even as the Guardian loomed above them like a falling star. Neville Longbottom stepped forward, wand lifted. "Elias, Marigold, stay behind the pillars. Move only when I tell you." Elias nodded, though his voice failed him. The Guardian stirred. The cavern dimmed. A voice, cold as the void between stars, echoed without sound. "I am unbound." The force of it slammed into the chamber. Dust lifted in spirals. Cracks raced across the ground. The breath was driven from Elias's lungs. McGonagall raised her wand, Do not let it advance." Their spells shot forth, gold, blue, white, intertwining into a radiant barrier. The Guardian's flames crashed against it, sending ripples of strain through the magical shield. The professor staggered but held firm. "Again!" Flitwick cried. A second volley struck the Guardian, momentarily halting its movement, but the creature hardly seemed perturbed. The flames of its body spiraled inward, condensing power. Neville's face drained of color. It's learning, adapting. The Guardian took a step. The cavern shook. Its flaming limbs swept outward like a scythe. The protective shield buckled, bending inward. Marigold gasped. "If that breaks, we're finished," Elias whispered. The Guardian lifted its head, if it had one, and the silver flames along its spine flared in a line of blinding radiance. "This world has forgotten my purpose," the voice murmured. "Yet I remember." McGonagall's eyes sharpened. "It is no guardian. It is a remnant of magics too great to be restrained. Hold steady." But Elias sensed something else beneath those words. Not malice, not hunger, something stranger. Like a storm that once shielded the castle and now, corrupted, believed destruction, was still a form of protection. The Guardian took another step. The ground split beneath its weight. Hooch was thrown aside, tumbling across the stone and landing near the broken pillar. Flitwick darted to her side, but was forced back as a wave of blistering heat surged over him. McGonagall gritted her teeth, her shield trembling. Neville, reinforce the eastern anchor. Neville sprinted toward the nearest pillar, directing his magic into its runes. But the Guardian sensed the attempt and lashed out with a tendril of flame. Neville was hurled backward, landing hard against the cavern wall. "Professor!" Elias shouted. Neville staggered upright, breathing heavily. "I'm unhurt, but we cannot strengthen them fast enough." The Guardian pressed a burning hand against the boundary of their combined spells. Silver cracks spread across the shield. Elias felt helpless. Marigold trembled beside him, gripping her wand but knowing it would do little. "We need to think. We need something more than counterspells." Her gaze darted across the chamber, landing on the ruined breach at the center. "The Founders bound this creature once," she whispered. "There must still be a way." Elias followed her gaze. The broken sphere still pulsed faintly, an echo of the spell that had once imprisoned the Guardian. Its fractured runes shimmered like dying embers, and around it, the pattern of the runic anchors, though weakened, remained intact. "What if," Elias murmured, "what if the breach can draw it back in?" Marigold gasped softly. "The binding spell. Elias, the Founder's enchantment wasn't meant to destroy the Guardian. It was designed to contain it. If we reforge even part of the pattern, just enough to pull on its essence, it might weaken it," Elias finished, "long enough for the professors to force it back." A tremendous impact threw them forward as the Guardian struck the defensive shield again. Flitwick cried out, but McGonagall stepped forward, her wand blazing fiercely, anchoring the barrier with sheer force of will. Marigold squeezed Elias's hand. "You repair the breach runes. I'll support the pillar patterns. If we synchronize them..." A sudden flare of silver light burst toward them. Elias pulled Marigold down as the ground where they had stood erupted in a geyser of flames. The heat stung his skin, filling the air with the scent of burning dust. "It knows," Marigold gasped. "It senses the anchors through us." Sinistra, lying weak but conscious near the far wall, lifted her head. Her voice trembled. "It fears the runes. That is why it bound itself to me, why it sought a vessel to break them. Finish what you began, before it finds a new host." Elias forced himself to stand, His legs shook, but determination steadied him. "Marigold, go." She nodded once and ran toward the nearest intact pillar. Elias sprinted toward the shattered breach, and every flame in the cavern bent toward him. The Guardian had noticed. A tendril of fire whipped across the floor, searing the air. Elias dove behind a toppled slab of stone. Heat washed over him. Neville shouted over the uproar, "Elias, stay down!" But Elias rose again. The breach pulsed before him like a wounded heart, its sigils broken, their lines erratic. He extended his wand. A faint memory from the ancient book flickered in his mind. A pattern of restoring magic that wove runes back into stability. Not a spell taught in any classroom. Something far older. He whispered the first word. The breach brightened. The Guardian screamed, its flame limbs thrashing violently. One swipe shattered the professor's barrier. McGonagall staggered but held her ground. Marigold shouted from the pillar, "Elias! Again!" He cast the second sigil. The breach flashed. A tether of pale light shot from it, thin as a thread, striking the Guardian at the edge of its flaming torso. The creature howled. Sinistra collapsed once more, covering her ears. Neville cried out, "It's working! Elias, continue!" The Guardian lurched toward him, fury shaking the cavern. Its flames writhed, dimming, brightening, dimming again as the tether pulled on it, weakening, resisting, dragging it toward the half-repaired breach. "Marigold!" Elias shouted. "The pillar! Now!" Her wand traced the final symbol, and the pillar pulsed golden. A second tether shot forward, binding another part of the Guardian's body. Flitwick and Hooch unleashed a combined strike. McGonagall raised her wand, channeling her power into the same runic rhythm. The chamber filled with swirling strands of ancient magic, silver, gold, white, intertwining like the roots of an enchanted forest. The Guardian lashed out with desperate fury, but its movement slowed, flames sputtering. Bit by bit, inch by inch, the ancient force was dragged backward, toward the breach that had once held it. The ground shook. The Guardian roared. The tethers tightened. And for the first time since its awakening, the Guardian faltered. The Guardian's faltering cry shook the cavern like a storm trapped beneath the earth. Its massive form buckled as the luminous tethers tightened around it, thin strands of ancient magic, trembling yet unbroken. Elias felt the pull of the enchantments through the air itself, as though the very stones were reaching toward the Guardian with desperate resolve. Yet the creature was not beaten. Not yet. Silver fire surged along its limbs, flaring outward in arcs that scorched the cavern walls. The surviving pillars groaned, runes flickering violently as the Guardian strained against the binding pattern. Elias felt the heat of the backlash sting his skin, but he held firm, wand raised, voice steady. "Marigold, keep the rhythm." She stood across from him, hands trembling but determined, tracing sigils in the air in perfect sequence. Her voice rose above the trembling of the cavern, calling each runic phrase as though speaking to the stones themselves. Neville clambered to his feet, clutching his wand. "We must reinforce the northern anchor," he shouted to Minerva McGonagall, who was braced against the full force of the Guardian's fury. McGonagall nodded sharply, though strain tightened every line of her face. "Go, before it breaks free!" Neville sprinted toward the fractured pillar, raising his wand high despite the chunks of falling debris. The Guardian roared again, its body twisting in unnatural contortions. The tether binding its right arm snapped with a thunderous crack, dissolving into sparks. The creature lunged sideways, flames whipping toward Marigold. Elias reacted instantly. "Protego!" His shield burst to life in a shimmering arc just in time. The Guardian's flames struck it, hissing, before rebounding upward in a volley of silver tongues. Marigold gasped, but did not falter. She raised her wand again, her voice trembling with power. "Reparare nexum!" The symbol atop her pillar flared bright gold, and the tether reattached, stronger this time, reinforced by her fierce determination. The Guardian recoiled, its form shuddering with restrained fury. But in that moment of regained strength, the creature shifted its attention, and its flames swept toward Elias. He ducked, felt the heat graze his arm again, and rolled across the floor. A stone slab crashed beside him where he had stood only seconds before. "Elias!" Marigold cried. "I'm fine," he shouted, breathless. But he wasn't. Exhaustion weighed heavily on him, each spell costing more will than the last. The ritual rune work required precision, and every disruption threatened the fragile balance they had fought to restore. Across the chamber, Neville reached the northern pillar and pressed his hand against the stone. "Reviviscera," he commanded. At first, nothing happened. Then the pillar pulsed with faint, uncertain light. Neville gritted his teeth, pouring more magic into the rune. The Guardian sensed it. With an ear-splitting cry, it slammed its flaming limb downward. The cavern floor cracked in a violent quake. Part of the ceiling collapsed behind Neville, showering him in dust and broken stone. McGonagall's voice rang out like thunder. "You will not harm my students." A beam of incandescent magic burst from her wand, pure gold, filled with a force that shook the air. It struck the Guardian squarely, halting its advance. The flames of its body rippled backward, recoiling as if burned. For a fleeting instant, the corruption within the Guardian was held at bay. "Now!" McGonagall commanded. Neville shouted his spell again. This time, the northern pillar responded. Its rune ignited, forming a golden counterpart to Marigold's pillar. Light stretched between them, knitting the broken lines of the ancient enchantment back into place. A third tether snapped into existence. Thicker, brighter. The Guardian shrieked, its body bending as though forced against an unseen current. Sparks of silver burst around it as the tethers tightened further. Marigold wiped her forehead with her sleeve, panting. "It's working, but we need one final anchor to complete the pattern." Elias looked toward the collapsed remains of the fourth pillar. "That one is gone. We can't repair it." Neville shouted back. The Founders never built a spell with only one point of failure. If a pillar fell, they must have had a secondary method of stabilization. McGonagall nodded. "Search the chamber. The failsafe could be anywhere." Elias looked around desperately. Dust clouded the air. Runes flickered in and out of sight with every pulse of the Guardian's light. The cavern's far wall was lined with ancient carvings, half obscured by debris. Then, a glint. A faint shimmer near the central breach. "Marigold," Elias pointed. "There, by the breach's base. Something's glowing." They ran together, dodging falling stones and the Guardian's thrashing limbs. At the base of the ruined sphere lay a circular indentation, engraved with runes so old they were nearly worn smooth. A missing sigil. Marigold inhaled sharply. "This is it, the seventh rune, the failsafe that channels the anchor pattern." "But it's empty," Elias said. "The key rune is missing." "No," Marigold whispered. "Not missing. Someone removed it." Her gaze drifted to Sinistra, who lay motionless, her robes singed. The Guardian's corruption had flowed into her. But perhaps the rune had been drawn out first, weakening the enchantments enough for it to slip free. Elias kneeled beside the indentation. "If we can recreate the missing sigil, the pattern might stabilize again." Marigold flipped open the ancient book, pages fluttered until they reached a diagram, a rune composed of 7 intersecting lines forming a starburst shape. "That's the one," she said, pointing. Elias steadied his wand. Together, they began tracing the sigil in the indentation with beams of golden light. Behind them, the Guardian realized what they were doing. The chamber erupted with flame. McGonagall and Flitwick hurled spells to hold back the onslaught, but the Guardian pushed harder, its fury rising with every moment. Hooch cried, "It's weakening the barrier again!" Neville shouted, "Elias, hurry!" The rune formation glowed, dim, brighter, brighter. The Guardian lunged. A limb of living fire swept toward Elias and Marigold. At the last instant, Neville threw himself in front of them. The flames struck him full force. He flew backward, crashing into the cavern floor, his wand spiraling out of his grasp. "Neville!" Elias shouted, terror tearing through him. The Guardian reared back for another strike, flames coiling into a spiraling lance aimed directly at them. Elias didn't think, didn't fear, didn't hesitate. He slammed his wand downward into the center of the half-formed rune. Golden light exploded through the chamber. For a moment, everything froze. The runes ignited, one by one, then blazed as the tethers multiplied, shooting forth in radiant arcs. The Guardian screamed, writhing, twisting, dragged backward toward the breach. Its limbs clawed at the air, grasping for anything, stone, pillar, flesh. But the ancient enchantments took hold. Marigold cried out, "Elias, it's working!" The Guardian burned brighter, its form unraveling into ribbons of light. Elias felt a pull, not against his body but his magic, something vast brushing him, trying to anchor itself through him. He pushed back, teeth clenched, forcing his will into the spell. McGonagall lifted her wand for the final blow. "Together!" she shouted over the roar. All surviving professors raised their wands. Marigold raised hers. Elias raised his. Their magic met in a single blinding surge, a torrent of ancient power woven with modern strength, and the Guardian shrieked one final time as its entire form shattered into spiraling shards of silver fire, sucked back into the heart of the breach as the runes sealed around it like closing jaws. Then, silence. Deep. Absolute. The Guardian was gone. For a long and breathless moment, the cavern lay wrapped in a silence so complete, it seemed the world itself had stopped. The dust hung unmoving in the air, suspended like pale mist in the fading glow of the runes. Elias felt his heartbeat thudding in his ears, slow, heavy, and almost painful after the violent storm of magic that had consumed the chamber. The breach, once a sphere of swirling fury, now resembled a dim, hollow shell. Its surface shimmered faintly, like moonlit water rippling in slow circles. The ancient runes encircling it glowed weakly yet steadily, restored not to their full strength, but to a quiet, stable hum, as though the spell had drawn a deep breath and settled to sleep once more. Marigold clutched Elias's sleeve. "Is it over?" Elias listened. No whispers curled through the shadows. No tremor shook the stone. No presence pressed upon his mind. For the first time since they'd entered the hidden chamber, the air felt like ordinary air again, cold, dusty, and blessedly empty of the Guardian's will. He let out a trembling sigh. "I think... yes." A soft moan came from nearby. Neville. Elias and Marigold hurried to him. Neville lay on his side, his robes charred, his face pale beneath a layer of dust, but his chest rose and fell, and when Elias touched his shoulder, Neville blinked up at them through dazed eyes. "You too," he murmured. "You did it." Elias shook his head. You saved us. You stepped between. Neville managed a faint smile. That's what professors do. Before he could say more, McGonagall reached them, her robes torn, her hair streaked with ash. Yet nothing, neither exhaustion nor injury, could diminish the fierce pride burning in her eyes. Mr. Wood, Miss Prewett. Her voice, though rasped by strain, held its usual sternness. Your actions tonight were reckless, dangerous, and very nearly fatal. Marigold lowered her gaze. But, McGonagall continued, her tone softening, you showed courage, clarity of thought, and a loyalty to this school that would have done any of the founders great honor. Marigold looked up, tears glinting. Elias felt a warmth in his chest that outweighed the ache of battle. Flitwick approached next, leaning on a broken pillar for support, his tiny frame trembling. Quite extraordinary, truly remarkable spellwork. I have not seen ancient runic alignment performed under such pressure in decades. Madame Hooch limped toward them, wiping soot from her cheek. More excitement than I care for, but you kept your heads. Good instincts. But Elias was already looking past them, toward the still form lying near the cavern wall. Professor Sinistra. He rushed to her side. Her breathing was shallow but steady, her expression weary, as though she had endured a nightmare from which she had only just awakened. The silver glow had vanished entirely from her eyes. Only the faint echo of sorrow remained. She stirred as Elias knelt beside her. Child, she whispered. Did it work? Yes, Professor, Elias said softly. It's gone. You're safe now. Her eyes filled with tears, quiet, grateful tears. I tried to fight it. I truly did. McGonagall stood over her, her expression gentle. No blame rests upon you, Aurora. You were ensnared by a force older than our school itself. We are simply grateful to have you back. Sinistra closed her eyes, relief washing through her features. The cavern dimmed as the runes settled into a low, steady glow. The ancient enchantments would hold, for now. Yet Elias sensed that the structure of the spells had changed. They no longer felt like walls built to imprison. They felt like bindings woven with renewed purpose, strengthened by sacrifice, courage, and the cooperation of many. Marigold touched Elias's arm. We should go. This place, it feels wrong to stay in it now. McGonagall nodded. The protective wards will seal this chamber once more. No one will enter it again without direct authority. Neville attempted to rise, but Elias and Marigold each took an arm to steady him. He chuckled softly, though the sound carried pain. Just give me a moment, and perhaps a pepper-up potion. You'll receive far more than a potion, McGonagall said. A night's rest for one. They made their way toward the stairway, stepping carefully over fallen stones and flickering embers. The professors followed, guiding Sinistra gently between them. As they reached the door, Marigold paused and looked back. What do you see? Elias asked quietly. She hesitated. The Guardian. When it faltered, I felt something. Not hatred, not a desire to destroy. More like a wounded instinct. She frowned, searching for the right words, as though it believed it was protecting Hogwarts, not harming it. As though the centuries changed it, but didn't fully erase what it once was. Elias looked back as well. The breach glimmered faintly, peaceful now, almost serene. Maybe, he whispered, some part of its old purpose survived. Marigold nodded slowly. And maybe that's why it resisted being destroyed, because deep down, it wasn't meant for violence, only for guardianship that time twisted into something else. They turned from the cavern and ascended the stone steps. When they reached the corridor above, the air felt fresh and sharp, carrying a hint of the castle they knew, alive but calm, wounded but healing. Torches rekindled on their own as they passed, flames rising with gentle warmth. The trembling beneath their feet had ceased entirely. Hogwarts was breathing again. At the top of the final stair, McGonagall paused and looked upon her battered colleagues and students. "No word of this evening's events is to leave this circle," she said firmly. "The school must return to peace. The children need stability, not shadows." Everyone agreed. Neville leaned heavily on the wall, managing another smile. "Come now. The worst is behind us." But even as he said it, Elias felt a peculiar tug at the back of his mind. Not dangerous, not a whisper, only a faint echo, like a sigh drifting long after a storm has ended. Not a threat, a reminder. Below the castle, deep in the sealed cavern, a single rune glowed, soft and steady, like the last ember of an extinguished fire. Marigold breathed out. Hogwarts endured. Elias nodded, and so did we. They followed the professors down the familiar corridors, leaving behind the darkness below and stepping into the quiet halls of the school they had fought to protect. But though the night was calm now, the echoes of ancient magic lingered, unseen, unheard, but not forgotten. The castle was safe again, yet forever changed by what had awakened beneath its foundations, and in ways none of them yet understood, this night would shape the days to come. Dawn crept over the castle like a soft, golden tide, warming the ancient stones that had trembled in darkness only hours before. Outside the windows, the sky blushed pink and silver, unaware of the battle fought beneath the earth. But inside the castle, quiet murmurs flowed like gentle streams, students waking, portraits yawning awake, staircases stretching after a long night of stillness. Yet for Elias and Marigold, the morning felt strange, as though the world moved a fraction slower, carrying the echo of a night that had carved itself deeply into their memories. They sat beside Neville Longbottom, in the hospital wing. He rested against a stack of pillows, a cup of steaming potion at his side. Madame Pomfrey bustled about him with brisk efficiency, insisting on mending every bruise and scorch mark despite his protests. "I'm quite all right," Neville insisted for the 10th time. Madame Pomfrey snorted. "Nonsense. Anyone who takes a blast of ancient starfire to the chest is not quite all right. Hold still." Elias tried not to smile, though the memory of Neville throwing himself in front of them still tightened his throat. "Professor," Elias said quietly, "we owe you everything." Neville's expression softened. "You owe me nothing. You both showed bravery beyond your years." "Hogwarts owes you." Madame Pomfrey muttered something about reckless behavior and overgrown danger magnets as she shuffled away, but Elias caught the faintest glimmer of pride in her eye. Marigold leaned forward. "Professor, what will happen now? To the chamber? To the breach? To Professor Sinistra?" Neville exhaled slowly, looking toward the window. "The headmistress has ordered the chamber sealed with the strongest enchantments known to the school. No student, no staff member, no curious wanderer will ever access it again without high authority." His voice lowered. "As for the breach, the Founder's magic was reforged, thanks in part to both of you. It will hold." "And Professor Sinistra?" Marigold asked. Neville hesitated. "She is resting. The mark of the Guardian's influence lingers, but the healers believe she will recover. She fought it longer than any of us realized." He paused. "She is stronger than she knows." Elias nodded slowly. "She tried to resist, even when it controlled her. A shadow passed through Neville's gaze. Possession by ancient magic is no small burden, but she will not face its aftermath alone. Outside the open windows, distant laughter drifted from the courtyard as students began their morning routines, never knowing how close danger had come. Marigold looked toward the door. "We should let you rest." Neville smiled faintly. "Don't stray too far. The headmistress wishes to speak with you both." Elias and Marigold exchanged a glance, the kind that contained both dread and wonder. They walked quietly through the corridors, still half expecting to feel tremors underfoot. But the castle was calm now, calmer even than before, as though grateful for their victory. When they reached the stone gargoyle outside the headmistress's office, the statue stepped aside without requiring a password. Marigold blinked. "It knows we're expected." They ascended the spiral staircase. Inside, Minerva McGonagall stood near the tall window, watching owls circle lazily above the grounds. She turned as the door closed behind them. "Mr. Wood, Miss Prewett," she said, her voice measured yet warm. "Please come forward." They obeyed, standing straight though their knees trembled. McGonagall regarded them for a long time, as if seeing not two students, but two threads in a much older tapestry. "Last night," she began, "you encountered powers long forgotten and dangers you were never meant to face. Yet you did not falter. You did not abandon one another. And you acted, not from ambition nor pride, but from a desire to protect this school." Her eyes softened, the sternness giving way to something gentler. "Hogwarts has always been shaped by those who love it. You have joined that lineage." Elias swallowed hard. "We just did what we had to." "Precisely," McGonagall said. "And it is that instinct which defines true courage." She reached into her robes and drew out 2 folded parchments, sealed with the crest of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. "For your service," she said, "you will receive commendations preserved in the school archives. Furthermore, should either of you choose to pursue advanced study in ancient magic or runic architecture, the staff will support your path." Marigold gasped. Elias felt his breath catch. "But be warned," McGonagall added gently, "it is not glory that awaits those who seek deep magic, only responsibility, and often sacrifice." Elias nodded. "We understand." "I believe you do," she said, "more than most your age." She dismissed them with a small smile, though the weight of unspoken gratitude hung in the air long after the door closed behind them. As they stepped into the corridor, Marigold released a shaky laugh. "A commendation, and an invitation to study ancient magic." "Elias, do you know what this means?" Elias shook his head. "I only know that I want to understand what happened down there. Not because of the danger, but because of what we felt." Marigold nodded, her expression reflective. "The Guardian, its purpose was never destruction. It was twisted, but not lost." They walked slowly, letting the castle guide them without thought. The portraits whispered as they passed, quiet phrases too soft to catch. Even the staircases shifted gently, never jolting them off balance. Hogwarts was different now, wounded but wiser, stronger but older, silent but listening. Elias and Marigold eventually reached the courtyard, where sunlight spilled across the grass in warm pools. Students hurried past, laughing, talking, living their ordinary lives. The simplicity of it felt precious, fragile in its innocence. Marigold sat on a low stone wall. "Do you think the Guardian will ever return?" Elias looked up at the towers, tall, ancient, watching over them like sentinels. "No, Not as it was. The Founder's magic held once more because we helped restore what they built. And maybe because the Guardian recognized our intent. Intent? She echoed. Elias nodded. To protect Hogwarts, just as it once did. A gentle breeze swept through the courtyard, stirring the leaves and tugging playfully at their robes. For just a heartbeat, Elias thought he felt a pulse beneath the wind. Not a whisper, not a call, only a quiet acknowledgement, as if the castle itself murmured, "You are part of me now." He closed his eyes, letting the feelings settle over him like warm sunlight. Marigold smiled. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." "Always," Elias said. The bells rang across the grounds, signaling the start of the day. Students rushed toward their classes. Life resumed. Elias stood and offered Marigold his hand. This time she took it without hesitation, and together they walked into the bright halls of Hogwarts, the school they had saved, the home that had tested them, the ancient fortress that now watched over them with quiet, enduring gratitude. The shadows beneath the castle slept once more, but the story of that night, its danger, its courage, its sacrifice, would linger like a hidden rune carved deep into the heart of Hogwarts. Not forgotten, not feared, simply waiting for the next chapter.